Hey everyone. So after the quite heavy video that I did a couple of weeks ago, which took me a little over an hour and 50 minutes to record and even longer than that to edit down, I decided I'd go a little bit easier on myself, give myself a little bit of a break this week and do something a little bit lighter. Something that I've done since I made that video is marathon the entire series of Firefly and then the subsequent film that came after it. Firefly only ran for 14 episodes, due in no small part, I would say, to studio interference. So Fox were the production company of this series, and from what I understand, there was a fair bit of meddling going on. They aired some of the episodes completely out of sequence for some random reason. And unfortunately, it led to bad ratings and eventually its cancellation. That being said, it's one of my favourite science fiction shows out there, and just because something comes in at the bottom of the list, by no means is that me saying that I don't like the episode. It's how ranking works. Something's got to come down at the bottom, and this is it. So at number 15, we have the episode The Train Job. It's a heist episode. Mal and his crew get employed by a character called Adeline Niska to go on board a train and steal its cargo. As the episode progresses, you find out that that cargo is medical supplies and it's going to people that genuinely need it. And so Mal and crew have a bit of a crisis of morals as to whether or not they should see through the job or return the cargo back to the town's inhabitants. It's a great episode. It does show that Mal may be a bit of a thief and a bit of a smuggler in much the same way as Han Solo is. He's also got that strong moral code to him. So coming in at number 14, we have the episode Bushwhacked. Mal and crew come across a derelict vessel floating out in the loneliness of space. They board her in an attempt to scavenge some of the cargo that they must have on board. And during doing this, they find a single solitary survivor. Without going into too much detail, they discover through this survivor that the ship was attacked by a faction in the universe called the Reavers, who are basically space psychos, cannibals, zombies, I don't know, whatever you want to call them. As the episode progresses, you discover that the survivor that they found was so deeply horrified and affected by what he saw that he basically turns into one of them himself. The reason why I've put this episode so far down on the list is quite simply because his transition into becoming a Reaver himself, I think, could have been done a little bit better. There was a lot of shaky camera work in there, and I get it, they weren't running on a particularly high budget, but it did affect that angle of things for me personally anyway. Number 13, we have Janestown. Now, this is a hugely entertaining episode. So the crew comes across a settlement on a planet in which Jane Cobb, the crew's mercenary character, is celebrated as somewhat of a folk hero, and they have even written a song in his honor. And it goes a little something like this. Jane, the man they call Jane. He robbed from the rich and he gave to the poor. That's enough of that. Moving swiftly on. Episode number 12. Shindig. This is another great episode. Mal and crew land on a planet and are given a job by a recurring character played by Mark Sheppard called Badger. This job is to approach one of the settlement's more richer characters to secure a shipment of goods to take off-world and onto another planet. While trying to secure that shipment of cargo, they have to go to an upscale party, which Inara is attending. And Mal and Inara have a kind of will they, won't they kind of love interest type situation going on there. And Mal basically sees Inara being mistreated by a character who's there, and they end up challenging one another to a duel. And that's what the episode essentially leads up to. It is a great episode, but I couldn't, in all honesty, put it any higher than number 12. Coming in at number 11, we have the episode A Heart of Gold. An old friend of Inara's called Nandi gets in touch with Inara asking for help because her and her little settlement are being plagued by the episode's antagonist, Rance Burgess, and they need protection. It's really hard to come up with reasons why you're placing an episode low in the ranking when realistically you like all the episodes more or less the same level. What can I say? When I was watching the other episodes, I enjoyed the others a little bit more than I enjoyed this one. So coming in at number 10, in the episode I mentioned before, Shindig, they picked up some cargo. This episode picks up from that and shows them delivering the cargo. During the course of this episode, Simon and River break away from the main group to go and explore some of the town and end up being kidnapped by some hill folk who are in need of a doctor, which Simon is. One thing leads to another, though, and they decide that River, who's a little bit on the crazy side, is a witch, and to burn them at the stake, basically. But Mal and crew come back and save them at the last minute. So at number 9, we have the episode Trash, which is the second episode featuring a particularly interesting character called Saffron. I'll talk a little bit more about this character when I get to her first episode in a few minutes. So she brings the crew a job, which is to basically sneak aboard this high-end residential area with loads of security and steal a laser gun, which is one of the only ones of its type that exist that can sell for millions of credits on the black market. Saffron isn't the most trustworthy character, though, and the crew kind of think that she's going to double cross them, which she ends up trying to do. But thanks to Inara, her plan doesn't quite work out so well. At number 8, we have the film that was released in 2005, Serenity. It's incredibly rare that a cancelled television show gets made into a movie, and especially a cancelled television show that only lasted for 14 episodes, only 11 of which actually aired. There was a lot of story threads that were kind of began in the television series that this film had to at least try and wrap up, and it couldn't do them all as effectively as I think I would have liked. That being said, though, given the fact that it's an hour and a half, maybe 2 hour long film, it does wrap up the, I would say, most important story thread in the most satisfying way I think that it could do with the time that it had. So the film itself is the best that it could have been. They did the best with it that they possibly could, I believe, and that's something to be extremely proud of. It will never replace another 5 seasons of the actual show, but it's great, and it is probably one of my favourite science fiction movies as well. Number 7, Ariel. So in this episode, Simon, who is the well-to-do doctor of the show, comes to the crew with an idea for a heist. They can break into an Alliance hospital on a planet called Ariel and steal medical supplies from the hospital, with no worries about the medical supplies not going to the people that need it. It being an Alliance hospital will be restocked in a matter of hours. But his main goal with this heist is so that he can utilize some of the hospital's diagnostic tools to find out what is wrong with his sister and what the Alliance actually did to her when she was incarcerated, basically. There's a nice twist towards the end with Jane, in which he kind of turns on River and Simon and then doubles back again when he realizes that's not going to work out for him. And there's a great final scene between Jane and Mal as well, when Mal realizes what Jane's done. So at number 6, we have the first episode featuring Saffron, Our Mrs. Reynolds. Mal and crew have done a job for a small settlement on a planet that's being plagued by bandits. They have a big party in the crew's honour after the job itself is done. And the day after, when the ship is leaving the planet and flying off to do its next job, they discover a stowaway, Saffron, who they later find out during the party the night before, in a kind of ceremony that Mal himself wasn't even aware existed. They discover that she is now married to Captain Malcolm Reynolds. And this whole revelation does kind of lead to some very funny moments coming from the crew, where they're kind of taking the mick out of Mal, and we find out that Saffron isn't everything that she claims to be. She's basically a con artist who's trying to steal the ship. At number 5, we have the actual pilot episode for the show. So this episode does a great job of introducing all of the characters to the audience and doesn't do it in a way that feels rushed or contrived. This episode was ran out of sequence originally by the network because they felt it was a bit too slow and they wanted something a bit more actiony. I think if the show had opened with this episode and people had been introduced to the characters at the moment that Joss Whedon wanted people to be introduced to the characters right at the beginning, things might have run differently for the show as a whole. At number 4, we have the episode The Message. An old war buddy of Mal and Zoe's comes back to them. Unfortunately, he is dead and has arranged to have his body mailed to them so that they can take him back to his home planet for a proper burial. But unfortunately, things don't quite go according to plan, and Mal and his crew find out that there is a rogue Alliance officer after this old war buddy of theirs. It all leads to a great and rather emotional story, actually, that has some flashbacks in it that are really nice back to Mal and Zoe's war days. Number 3, we have Objects in Space. Now, this episode actually includes one of my favourite antagonists from the show in Jubal Early. This guy's a bounty hunter who's been sent out by the Alliance to capture and bring in River and Simon Tam. He takes over the ship in rather quick fashion. He is a particularly skilled individual. Eventually, things go badly for him, and River herself actually gets one up on him. Number 2, we have war stories. So, from the episode The Train Job, the crime boss that hired Mal and his crew to rob the train comes back for revenge and captures Mal and Wash and subjects them to some pretty brutal torture. In this episode, we really see just how much Mal cares for his crew and how far he's willing to go for his crew, in the sense that he isn't focusing on getting himself through this. He is focusing on getting his crew member through all of this. Wash isn't a combat-ready character. He isn't somebody that can stand up to torture for very long, and you can really see it in his face during those quite uncomfortable torture scenes that he is very nearly ready to break, but Mal finds a way to get him through it. And finally, number 1, my favourite episode out of the entire series, Out of Gas. So the ship that this crew is living on and basically calling their home gets hit by a catastrophic malfunction, one which they can't realistically come back from. The ship has no power, the ship has no life support. The only thing that is allowing them to breathe is the air that was pumped into the atmosphere before the malfunction itself hit. I really love the way that this episode not only tells the story that it establishes, but also goes back using flashbacks to showing how the core crew came on board. And it really goes a long way, again, to showing how much the crew and the ship, most importantly the ship, how much it actually means to Malcolm Reynolds as well. It's a story which is well written, emotionally told, brilliantly acted, and well directed as well. And that's why it's my favourite. So there is my ranking for Firefly and Serenity. Any brown coats out there, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, and how would you rank the series if you wanted to rank it. Let me know in the comments. Like, subscribe, share the video if there's any brown coats out there that you think might enjoy it, and I'll see you next time. Thanks again. Bye. Jane, the man they call Jane. He robbed from the rich and he gave to the poor, stood up to the man and he gave him what for. Our love for him now ain't hard to explain. The hero of Canton, the man they call Jane. Now Jane saw the mother's backs breaking. He saw the mother's lament. He saw that magistrate taking every dollar and leaving 5 cents. He said, "You can't do that to my people. You can't crush them under your heel. Well, the man they called Jane, he turned round his plane, stole everything Boss Higgins had to steal. He robbed from the rich and he gave to the poor, stood up to the man and he gave him what for. Our love for him now ain't hard to explain. The hero of Canton, the man they call Jane. Now here's what separates heroes from common folk like you and I. The man they called Jane, he turned round his plane and let that money hit the sky. He dropped it onto our houses. He dropped it onto our yards. Well, the man they called Jane, he turned round his plane, headed off to the stars. He robbed from the rich and he gave to the poor, stood up to the man and he gave him what for. Our love for him now ain't hard to explain. The hero of Canton, the man they call Jane.